Welcome to the SailPoint Identity IQ Basic Training course. The course includes 5 modules. In Module 1, we'll provide a high-level overview of Identity IQ and look at identity cubes, which is Identity IQ's term for special records that represent identities. We'll also see how Identity IQ connects to other applications to collect data. We'll move on to roles, policy, and risk in Module 2, and we'll cover access certifications in Module 3. In Module 4, we'll learn how to manage the lifecycle of identities using Identity IQ's Lifecycle Manager. And finally, in Module 5, we will take a brief look at Identity IQ's reporting features. This basic training course is a prerequisite for both the Fundamentals of Identity IQ Implementation training course and the Identity IQ Administration course. Each video presentation ends with a demo in a live Identity IQ environment of the concepts covered in that module. This is Module 1 of the basic training course, Identity IQ and Identity Cubes. The objectives for Module 1 are to understand what we mean by a governance-based approach to identity, to introduce the SailPoint Identity IQ application, and to introduce some concepts around identities, identity cubes, and the aggregation of user data and entitlements from external applications. What is identity governance? Identity governance is the centralized, policy-based management of user identities and access. Identity governance helps organizations meet their needs for both IT security and regulatory compliance. Governance-based identity management. Identity governance is more than a technology issue. It's also a business issue, which means that we want to enforce business rules on what has traditionally been seen as a standard IT help desk or administrative function. We apply business rules to the concept of identity management so we can improve service delivery and keep costs down by creating operational efficiencies, apply preventive and detective controls to streamline compliance and audit activities, enforce business policies and processes to better manage risk, and engage and empower business users to participate more actively and directly in the identity management process. In identity governance, one of the primary goals is detecting and addressing any inappropriate access that users may have. Are there users with access they don't need or shouldn't have? Do users have access that might be in violation of company policy? For example, the ability to both approve and pay a vendor. Or are there users with access that makes them riskier? Once you learn what's in your environment, you can certify that users have and maintain appropriate access, determine if they are in violation of any policies, and calculate risk for users. You can use reporting and analytics to look at the data in ways that are meaningful to you, even grouping users into populations of your choice. And you can detect when a user's data and access are changed in external applications so you can manage those changes. Another important goal is preventing compliance issues by controlling access and requiring approvals proactively. As users join or leave the organization, or change departments and therefore change job functions, you can make sure that any identity changes within your organization have gone through an approval process. And you can simplify the request and approval process with a business-friendly user interface that includes lifecycle events and requests, which are essentially workflows to get the work done. Introducing Identity IQ. The SailPoint Identity IQ application is made up of 2 separately licensable modules which address the detective and preventative goals we have already discussed. The Compliance Manager module provides access certification and policy evaluation functionality, allowing you to review and address user access through formal processes in the system. Lifecycle Manager allows users to request access they need to various applications in the enterprise. Additionally, Lifecycle Manager supports the triggering of automated processes based on business events that occur within the lifecycle of a user's employment within an organization, like a new employee, a job changer, or a leaving employee. And all of this is supported in the context of your governance model and defined approval structures. In support of either or both of these modules, you have access to some important core Identity IQ functions. First, we offer a variety of identity intelligence tools that you can use to understand, report on, and query your data. Interactive dashboards offer an at-a-glance view into system data, and built-in reports and the ad hoc querying functionality work together to provide comprehensive data analysis capabilities. The Unified Governance Platform provides the infrastructure for storing your identity data and modeling your business. With our provisioning layer, you can write access changes directly to other applications in the enterprise using the built-in Identity IQ provisioning engine. Or we can integrate with your existing provisioning applications or your service desk software to manage the final steps in the provisioning process. Identities, foundation for governance. The core of governance is the identities in your system. A strong governance model starts with integrated, normalized identity data as its foundation. We provide this normalized identity data by collecting it from various applications in your organization, and then use correlation rules to make sure that all the right data gets attached to the right identities within the system. Once we have normalized identity data, we can apply the governance model, including the business roles, the business policies, and the business risk model to the identities. And out of that comes the ability to use our compliance management component to see if users have the right access. Are they in violation of any policies? How risky are the users? This same set of data is our starting point for the Lifecycle Manager, which manages changes to the identity cube over time. All changes made to the identity, whether based on manual access requests or automatic provisioning processes, are performed within the context of the business models and the user's existing access. Identity cubes. We store user data inside of Identity IQ in what we call identity cubes. These cubes are built through a discovery process where we collect data from the IT environment. We keep these identity cubes updated with the current state of the user's access through account aggregation tasks, which we will talk about in more detail in a moment. We can also track activity data, information about actions users take in the various applications in your environment, when there are good sources for that data. The identity cube sits squarely between the IT environment, where we define and learn about what access the user has, and the business environment, where we can define and model a business context for analyzing and understanding the access the user has versus what they should have. And with tools like certifications and reports, we can help automate the process of moving towards your organization's identity governance goals. Aggregation. Account aggregation is the process we use to collect account data from the various applications in your enterprise. There are 2 points to consider when performing account aggregations. The first is determining which applications to aggregate, and the second is to determine in what order to aggregate the applications. We always want to aggregate identity data from our best source of user data first, typically an HR system or a directory such as Active Directory or LDAP. Ideally, our best source of user data can tell us all of the users or people in the organization. However, Identity IQ can create initial identity cubes from multiple sources if necessary. For example, when you have employees in one application and contractors in a separate application. Data we collect from subsequent applications will correlate to existing identity cubes. For example, we may create our initial identities by aggregating Active Directory. Then, when we start aggregating other applications, we'll tie the account information from those applications to the identities that we have already created from our primary source. Then, periodically, we'll update these accounts as changes occur. How often should you aggregate your identities? There's no right or wrong answer. A lot of it depends on how often you're going to use that identity data. Some businesses may aggregate on a daily or even hourly basis, while others may only aggregate during specific periodic certification cycles. Since we provide full scheduling capabilities for these aggregation tasks, you can aggregate identities as frequently as needed to meet your requirements. Once you have aggregated account data from the applications you are interested in, you can use that information in various processes in Identity IQ. You can manage the access a user has by adding and removing system rights to their accounts. You can certify your users. You can ensure the access they have is appropriate and in compliance with company policies. You can calculate and monitor risk scores for users. And you can establish a role model using role mining. Demo scenario, Acme Corporation, Phase 1. Throughout these training modules, we're going to be working with data for a fictional company called Acme Corporation. We'll use Acme for the product demonstrations. Acme Corporation is a company with 32 employees plus one compliance officer. They have two major applications in their Identity IQ installation, an enterprise directory and a finance application. This is Acme's organizational chart. The people that we're going to use in our demos are Cam O'Neill, our compliance officer and our role and policy administrator, John Knight, the IT director and owner of the enterprise directory, Bob Fields, the finance director and owner of the finance application, and Chris Stevens, manager of the accounts receivables department. Acme Corporation's goal for Phase 1 of their Identity IQ project is to aggregate or collect data from their two applications. We'll load the enterprise directory first to create initial identities because it is Acme's best source of user data. Every employee is in the enterprise directory. Then we'll aggregate from the finance application, which will update the existing identities, but only for those users who have access to the finance application. Once we're finished aggregating identities, we'll define the owners of each application, and then we'll give users additional capabilities within Identity IQ as needed to perform their job functions. We'll go ahead now with the demo for Module 1 to showcase some of the concepts that were introduced in this first section. The first thing we'll do is to log into Identity IQ as the administrator. In a new installation of Identity IQ, there's just one user in the system, and this user's name is spadmin with a password of admin. So let's log in. First, we'll look at identities, identity warehouse, and verify that there's just one user in the system, the spadmin user. Exiting from the identity warehouse, we'll go back to the home view, which is the default view that a user sees logging into Identity IQ. In the upper right corner is the user's name. We're logged in as the administrator. Click the administrator to access help and logout functions as well as user preferences. Each user can customize the appearance of their own home page. Click Edit to customize the home page. We'll add a new quick link card to spadmin's home page. Click the Add Card box in the Quick Links row, select Create Identity, and click Save. A new Create Identity card is now added to the Quick Links row. With this, you will be able to create new identities manually in the system. You can change the layout of the home page as well. Drag the Create Identity card that you just added one space to the left. It is now swapped places with Track My Requests. Click Save to save the customizations you made to the home page. For the Acme Corporation, our first objective is to collect identities and build our initial identity cubes. We'll go to Setup Tasks and see that there have been some account aggregation tasks predefined. You could right-click on these and click Execute in Background to execute a task. In this case, the task will collect data from a specific application, namely our Enterprise Directory application. We'll click on Task Results when it's finished and select the task to review the results. We'll be able to see which applications were scanned, how many accounts were scanned, and how many identities were created, if any, and some additional information as well. Now if we go back to Identities, Identity Warehouse, we'll see that identities have been created and identity data has been collected. We can scroll through this list of identities that came from the Enterprise Directory application. Now we'll run the task to collect information from our finance application. Again, we'll right-click on the task to execute it, and then go to the task results when it's finished to view the results. This time we have fewer accounts scanned and fewer identities updated. This is because the finance application doesn't have an account for every employee, but only for those whose jobs are related to finance in some way. Now if we go to Identities, Identity Warehouse, we'll be able to see updated information for these identities. So if we happen to pick someone who is in the finance department, we'll select Ann Parson. We'll be able to see all the data we have collected about this user, including the attributes we've collected about her identity, as well as the applications that she has accounts on. We can even drill down to see the specific detail. As you can see here, this user, Ann Parson, has payroll access on the finance application, and that makes sense because Ann is part of the payroll department. If we take a look, we can see under her enterprise directory that she is a payroll manager in the department payroll. Now we've collected data from two systems and rolled that up into Identity IQ. The next thing we'll do is run this Acme post-aggregation identity refresh task. This task goes through all of the identity data that we've collected, searches for and updates the manager attribute. It uses the manager information read in for each user, searches for that manager in the list of identities, and creates a link between the employee and the manager. We use this task to build relationships that are going to be important later for approval processes and certifications. If we go back to our identity warehouse once again and take a look, we'll see that the manager attribute is now populated. We can drill down and take a look at one of these managers. We'll choose Ann Parson again, and we can see that her manager is Bob Field. Then if we click the manager's name, we can be taken up through the path of users until we get to John Smith, who's our CEO and doesn't have a manager. Our next assignment will be to grant access to our compliance officer, Cam O'Neill, to specific capabilities within the Identity IQ application that are over and above the standard user capabilities. So we'll search for Cam under Identities, we'll find Cam, and then we'll come over here to the User Rights tab. And then we'll give Cam multiple roles within the system. He's going to be a compliance officer and also a role and policy administrator, and we'll save that. Cam O'Neill now has more access than a standard user, and he could perform some of the operations that we'll show you in a later module. The last thing we'll do before ending this demonstration will be to set up appropriate owners for our two applications. We'll go to Application, Application Definition, and we see our two applications defined here. It's important to assign an owner to an application because the default behavior in Identity IQ is to send requests for access to an application to the application owner for approval. For the enterprise directory, we'll add our IT director, John Knight, as the owner. Then we can scroll to the bottom and save that. Notice that you could start typing the first few letters in a username field, and the system will auto-populate a drop-down list. As you get familiar with the interface, you'll start to see that behavior in other places. This makes it very simple if you can't remember users' names. And we'll do the same thing for the Finance app, except that we'll make the Director of Finance the owner of this application, and that is Bob Fields, and we'll save that. This concludes the demo for Module 1. This concludes Module 1.